met Janet on the porch at Adams Morgan one steamy summer night in Washington. It was a typical summer day, the heat and humidity were over 100, and I was soaked through. No one in their right mind would stay in Washington in July. No wonder the creatures in Congress are running away for a 5-week vacation. But my graduate commitments kept me tied to this place, so I stood there suffering. It was damn painful. The District of Columbia was created from lands given by the states of Maryland and Virginia, and our selfish founders would never have given away land suitable for agriculture. Instead, they gave the country an excellent piece of swamp near the Potomac. Although the area is now being developed with expensive real estate, the essence of the pristine quagmire is still felt. 2 things immediately stood out to me about my future wife. First, she was lying on a shabby sofa on the veranda, clearly drunk, which promised a solution to my dryness problem. I was going through a long period of stagnation in my sex life, so romance was the last thing I needed. Secondly, she had beautiful breasts. It may seem superficial to be attracted to a woman because of her breasts, but as they say, you can't remember personality. She had a sweet, oval face, not beautiful but pleasant, and very thick brown hair that flowed down her back in waves. She had an incredibly sexy mouth with very full and expressive lips. Movie stars pay fortunes for lips like these. She wasn't unconscious or anything like that, it was just clear that her judgment might be seriously impaired. In short, she was exactly what I was looking for in a woman. I'm not a predator, I would never force a girl against her will. I'm just someone who usually needs a lot of alcohol to succeed. The fact is that I find it easier to get along with women if their powers of observation are reduced to such an extent that they do not notice my innate lack of subtlety. I sat down next to her. She smiled at me stupidly and hummed, "I was hoping you'd come talk to me." This was something new. Usually, when I sit down next to a beautiful girl, I hear, "Off you freak." I am average in every way, in height, weight, and appearance, and my approach to women really needs improvement. So women usually decide that life is too short to waste time talking to me. That one actually said she hoped I would talk to her was new. I tried to put on my best Prince Charming face and said, "Do we know each other?" Damn, that wasn't very charming. She said in one of those fuzzy drunken voices that indicate she's far gone, "I was in your cryptology class last year, don't you remember me?" Wow, at least she saw me in my element, I thought to myself. Any woman who takes an advanced code-breaking class is a real nerd, and I'm the king of it. Maybe it will compensate for some of the factors I lack, such as looks, money, and sex appeal, not to mention some aspects of personal hygiene. Actually, this drunk little nerd might be the girl I've been looking for my whole life. But I still didn't remember her. I asked her what her name was, and she told me Janet Eskew. I remembered Janet Eskew, but that girl was about the size of a killer whale, and she had bangs that made her look like she had just stepped out of a 1950s Archie and Veronica comic book. This petite woman had a very slender and curved figure with magnificent breasts and was dressed as if she had graduated from Choate. I looked puzzled. She giggled stupidly and said, "You knew me before I lost weight. I had problems after my parents divorced, and I gained weight while I was in your class. It took a lot of therapy and a crash diet, but now I'm back to my normal state." I looked at her carefully a second time. She wasn't a beauty, but she was incredibly sexy. She had the open, sweet girl next door face and those aforementioned breasts, but she also had long, slender legs and nice round hips in tight jeans. The small yellow tank top with spaghetti straps showed off about 10 centimeters of prime dark cleavage. She looked tempting, so I decided to kiss her. Remember, we were sitting in the dark on the front porch outside of a loud party, and we met just a minute and a half ago. She surprised me by not slapping me, screaming, or running to the police. Instead, she wrapped one arm around my neck, pressed herself against me, and opened her mouth for the hottest kiss I had ever experienced. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment all her life. I don't believe in random luck, but it was a long dry time, so I was not in a mood to look for a catch. I started fiddling with her bra. We heard people approaching in response to the noise, so we just sat there casually until half the party thundered past us and ran out onto the sidewalk looking for the source of the noise. She looked at me, I looked at her, and we both laughed. We spent about 15 minutes together, but I just knew I was going to marry this delightfully strange little woman. The next evening, we realized the inevitable. This happened during a night session as muggy as the weather in Washington. We got married just 4 months later and settled into a nice little apartment down the Red Line in Shady Grove. I know you're probably thinking it was stupid to get married so quickly, but Janet's charm really clouded my judgment. I should have suspected something if I had time to think about it, but Janet was so attractive, and I needed her so much. The first few months together were idyllic. I couldn't imagine a more compatible woman or a more satisfying lifestyle. She and I just got along well. We had sex a lot, but we also did all the fun things you could think of in a city with unlimited entertainment options. Everyone thought we were the perfect couple. Some couples hang on each other in a wet, saccharine kind of love. Janet was a very smart woman, and our lives were built on our shared intelligence. We jested and teased each other. We passed puns around to each other like a good comedy couple, and in general, we shared a gentle, ironic view of the world. It was hard not to love a woman who saw irony and humor in everything she did. It was almost too good to be true, and of course, this was indeed the case. The first sign that change was coming came when I met her father. We got married in a quick civil ceremony, as is customary among nerds, but she pestered me for months to meet her father just to get his blessing. So we took the Acela train and headed to New York for the weekend. I knew her father lived in Manhattan. I didn't know it was overlooking Central Park in the 80s. It turned out that Dad made his money the old-fashioned way. He inherited it. And as F. Scott Fitzgerald said, the rich are different from you and me. Dad treated me with the same contempt that the lord of the manor would show to any disheveled old peasant his stupid daughter had just brought home. He seemed to expect me to reach for my forelock every time I addressed him. Long story short, I hated him from the moment we met. Janet also changed 180 degrees. She went from being open and friendly to being sarcastic and arrogant. It was clear that she thought the little people were inferior to her. Being one of the little people, I was stunned. It was also clear that the separation between father and mother was the result of father's debauchery, and Dad didn't try to hide it. He clung to his right to seduce any woman he met with the same fanatical confidence with which Charles I must have had the divine right of kings. Unfortunately, I learned what this meant in the worst possible way. He drove us across the park to the Carlisle for dinner. This experience was so out of my control that I knew he had planned it simply to show me how sublime he was. Janet wore a tight little black dress and heels that showed off the goods. She turned heads everywhere we stopped. Both she and her father were the picture of a sophisticated New Yorker. I'm not very good. I didn't really do anything shameful, but I wasn't the star of the show either. Dad kept asking me about what I was doing, and I tried to explain to him about the offer I had just received from Georgetown. At first, it was the position of associate professor. This is not normal in academia. In fact, I had done very well in this regard. His response was to dismiss me as a teacher, which I think I was, but from the tone of his voice, it seemed that anyone could do this. But this is not the case. I definitely wasn't making the kind of money his daughter was used to, but I was well on my way to success in my chosen field. Later, I remembered all the consequences, but at the time, I felt inadequate and angry because I saw nothing in this man's own achievements that could justify his high opinion of himself, except, of course, that he was born into the right family. I was a little hurt that Janet didn't protect me, but I saw that she had daddy issues, and I loved her, so I was willing to give her the opportunity to communicate with her father. On the other hand, it did not increase my trust in her. I was also bothered by the way her father treated her. It was like she was his date, and what's worse, she allowed it, which didn't make me happy at all. They both got drunk. I pushed the two of them into a taxi and we went back through the park to 86th Street. I was driving in front and they were both sitting in the back. The next morning, the woman I knew as my wife magically reappeared. Her body language, voice, and behavior changed 180 degrees. It was as if she had taken off yesterday's image like a robe and hung it in the closet of her father's guest room. It was actually kind of creepy. We took a taxi to Penn Station, and she was as energetic and cheerful as ever. It was like casting out an evil spirit from our marriage, so I made a mental note to stay away from Templeton Eskew. Janet's transition from one person to a completely different person would have bothered me if it had continued, but it was just a day, and it didn't bother me too much. That's how it should have been. The next 5 years flew by on blissful wings. The main feature of that period was the data compression algorithm that I came up with. Data compression is at the heart of computer vision, which has applications in everything from search engines to cruise missiles. So, for us nerds, this is the holy grail. In my last days at GUO, I worked on an excellent lossless algorithm and I perfected it 2 years later. I'm too naive to do actual production, but I had a friend named Scott. He was a genius when it came to bringing products to market, so he did the heavy lifting and I got 40% of the shares as a silent partner. Our first contract was with RAN. Almost immediately, the targeting system for their Turcom Smack block Roman 4 became much more capable and my bank account became unimaginably larger. I'm a nerd, I don't care about money and I don't know anything about finance, so I had Scott take care of it all and I never discussed our financial situation with Janet. In my opinion, this would sound self-congratulatory, and nerds don't brag about how much they earn. Conquest points in World of Warcraft, yes, but never money. I just continued to live as if nothing had changed. Later, I was very glad that I did just that. Money was a blessing only because it gave me the freedom to do whatever I wanted for the rest of my life. I continued teaching and loved it, therefore I retained my position on the faculty. But I did buy a house in Georgetown, I paid in cash. Janet didn't seem to notice. I think she thought I was up to my eyeballs in debt. The only real change was that it was now easy to walk to campus. Janet herself went through a huge transformation. The 23-year-old girl I met that hot night in Adams Morgan was now a 28-year-old woman with a style I could only dream of. When I first met her, she was a sweet and bubbly sexy girl, but as she approached her late 20s, her face became more refined and her body rounded out. She always had magnificent breasts and remained just as juicy and proud, but now her thighs and buttocks were breathtakingly round and muscular. She was truly a magnificent-looking woman. She never asked about money, she just always had it. Accordingly, she mastered all the rich lady techniques of dressing, grooming, and fashion that differentiate the simply beautiful from the stunning. In fact, she was now many kilometers above me on the social ladder. Unfortunately for me, I am not that sophisticated or educated and I never will be. I live mostly in my head and I never wanted to be socially noticeable. My world is a bowed head and virtuality. It may be isolating, but it's the only place I'm truly happy. The good news was that my abilities and interests financed Janet's lifestyle. The bad news was that we started going in different directions. We may have been a perfect couple once, but now we were different people. Over time, we began to function in completely different areas. Janet was a woman who preferred black ties and the Kennedy Center. In my opinion, a good evening is sitting in Blues Alley. She liked the atmosphere at the Verizon Center. I really enjoyed the peace and quiet of our yacht on the Potomac. I think you can see where this is going, and it inevitably happened. Most of the time, we had a free and easy life, but it was obvious that we were no longer as closely connected, at least not in the same way as in the beginning. This manifested itself in occasionally tense conversations and a huge decline in the quality of our sex life. But I must confess that I did not see the torpedo coming until it actually struck. I realized that I seriously lacked sociability and I knew some changes would be needed, but that was all I thought through. On the other hand, Janet had already completed this, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say she was out the door. I returned from class one bright, sunny morning in May. The weather in Washington was in that short window of time where the term amazing best describes it. I placed my laptop bag on the hallway table, entered the living room whistling cheerfully under my breath, and stopped dead in my tracks, amazed by what I saw. Janet sat nervously on the couch, holding the hand of a tall, very good-looking guy. Templeton Eskew sat on the sofa opposite them. Every red light, horn, and alarm immediately went off in my head. Whatever was going to happen, it would be bad. Janet looked at me sadly and said the 5 words no husband wants to hear are, "Jake, we need to talk." I stared at her. She looked worried. Templeton grinned. Who the hell is this other guy? Was it her lawyer? In fact, he really was Janet's lawyer, but he was also her lover. She said, "Jake, this really hurts me, but you need to know that I'm leaving you. I could just disappear, but I value the time we spent together and wanted to let you know personally." Damn it. I sat down in the nearest chair. I have no idea what was on my face, but my soon-to-be ex-father-in-law looked delighted. Was she leaving me? Where did this come from? I probably looked like the proverbial fish out of water. I babbled, "Are you leaving me? Why? What have I done? What will happen to me?" She showed fake concern and said, "You'll be okay. I know that you're a strong person. It's just that Burton and I have found each other again, and we can't be apart." Templeton said with contempt in every word, "Janet and Burton have been together since childhood. He is the right man for her. Janet realizes that they should never have separated. Burton didn't actually cheat on her, he was just having fun. Now he's ready to settle down and Janet has agreed to be his wife." I said sadly, "But she's my wife." Crap, listen to me, I sounded like a snotty little wimp. It was just humiliating. My father's raw humiliation and smug tone pushed me over the edge. I didn't know that I could do it, but Bruce Banner probably didn't think so either. I just got angry. I turned to my father, not trying to control the anger in my voice. "I'll rip your head off if you open your mouth again, you arrogant bastard." He began to open his mouth. I started to rise from the chair. He could see the real anger in my eyes. He made a silent gesture with his finger to his lips. I turned to the treacherous ex, as if no longer my wife, and said, "Are you telling me that this worm is your former lover and that you are leaving me for him? How long have you been sleeping with him?" The aforementioned worm said in a very offended tone, "Now look here, old man." I turned to him and said, "Where I come from, you and I should be beating each other right this second. So unless you want to go to the parking lot, I advise you to stay away from it. This is between me and my future ex-wife." He just sat there in disgust. I turned to her and said, "Okay, cheater, over to you. How long has this been going on and what do you propose to do next?" Janet looked stunned and very angry. She didn't expect this. She said, "Dad hasn't felt like you're the right person for me since our first trip to New York. He urged me to give Burton another chance. Burton came all the way here to accompany me to the Washington National Opera last November. This was the event that I refused to go to because it was too boring. I remember that she had a black tie party in the suite I bought for her at the Jefferson. I expected a scandal when I told her I didn't want to go. She came home the next day and was as sweet and loving as ever. I said, "So you've been having fun with him for 6 months?" She looked distressed and said condescendingly, "What humiliating words, Jake. This is not in your favor." But to answer your question, Burton and I became a couple from that night on. I'm surprised you haven't heard about this since we didn't hide our relationship. But then again, you don't travel in our circles. We want this to be permanent now, and I need you to set me free so I can marry the person I should have been with in the first place. I'm sure you understand that it's over between us. I love you, but I haven't been in love with you for a while. I looked at the traitor and her two-faced father. Then I turned my attention to the worm. I said, so you want to marry her knowing what she is? He muttered, now look here, you can't talk about Janet like that. I said, how can I talk about her? I gave her all the love and devotion that was in me. I gave her money so she could pretend to be a community elder. All I expected was to raise children with her and die in her arms. As a reward, she's been entertaining you for the past 6 months. They both exploded. I looked at them with murder in my eyes. They both fell silent. I calmly addressed everyone in the room without showing any anger in my voice. Is this really what you all want? The brat looked thoughtful. Dad looked outraged. Janet looked serious. Janet said with anger in her voice, this is what we all want, Jake. You have to let me go. I've already moved all my stuff to Burton's, and when I leave here, I won't be coming back. I don't need anything from you, just a quick divorce. Burton has a lot more money than you, so I don't need anything except your blessing. I looked at her, truly perplexed. The stupid girl really expected me to smile and say, okay, good luck with your life. Seriously, I couldn't imagine how someone could be so naive. I sincerely looked into their eyes and said, I hope you all burn in hell. This caused everyone to gasp. After that, I got up and left the apartment. If I had stayed any longer, I would have killed every single one of them. I'm not usually impulsive, I think everything over in my head. So I walked along the seashore and the shoreline to Key Park, trying to cool down. I sat on a bench and watched the plane slowly fly over Roslyn towards DCA Airport. It was a beautiful day, and my thoughts were racing wildly. I don't know how other people react to personal betrayal. I was stunned. I knew betrayal when I saw it, I just didn't know what to feel about it. There wasn't much pain, perhaps I didn't love her as much as I thought. However, there was now an emptiness in my soul, as if all the confidence had drained out of me. I wasn't going to shed any tears for her, perhaps because I don't think lamenting about lost love is particularly manly. Obviously, she was not who I thought she was, and she made her choice, so be it. Her passing did not affect the rest of my life. In fact, in some ways, nothing significant had changed. I was still young and richer than I ever imagined. It was fortunate that Janet and her father despised me so much that they never took any interest in my financial affairs, a bad assumption in the information age. Take Bill Gates, for example. I knew 2 things for sure. First and foremost, I would never trust another person again. Against my better judgment, I gave my heart to Janet unconditionally, and look where it got me. So, women can be crossed off the list of mistakes I won't make again in the future. Second, I needed to get out of here. Thanks to my algorithm, I could do whatever I wanted in life, and the last thing I needed was a reminder of how bad my existence had become. My life was already meaningless, so I should have a little fun. I walk back to the Rab estate at G de la PL. St. Denis is often described as Detroit with couscous. Looking back at the destroyed buildings, I understood why. 20 minutes ago, I was standing at one of the 3rd access levels of the tunnels at the Stade de France. From this vantage point, I could see about 80,000 of my fellows. What the French call football misses me, but I didn't come here to watch the game. I took the RER to St. Denis to assess where I was in my recovery. It was a test of my mood, so to speak. Some go to church, some sit on the top of a mountain with their legs crossed and mutter, "OM." I come to sporting events to try to understand my place in the grand scheme of things. I like to see the big picture when I think about where I am, and there's nothing like a stadium full of people to get useful insight into where you stand in relation to life. I looked at the backs of the heads in the countless rows in front of me. All I could see was a mix of hair. There was a variety of colors and lengths, but none stood out. They were invisible skins in a boiling sea of wool, most likely like a flock of lemmings. I shook my head and walked back down the steps. Behind me, the entire stadium erupted in applause as someone performed an epically heroic feat that would be replaced by another epically heroic feat next week. I sighed. At least I confirmed what I came to find out: insignificance is the human condition. I took the Paris metro back to the FDR stop at the Arc de Triomphe, then walked back to the hotel. I stayed at the Hotel California in the 8th arrondissement. Check out this place, it's real. I wonder if the French understand the irony of the lyrics to the old Eagles song, "You can check out anytime, but you can never leave." My location could not have been more suitable. I've been living in Paris for the last 4 months since the divorce became official. I needed to be anywhere but Washington, so I asked for a sabbatical to collect my thoughts. Not surprisingly, Georgetown was happy to give it to me. My classes this past semester really left a lot to be desired. Meanwhile, the deceiver became a prominent figure in the public life of Washington. It seems like her sharing with me was a debut of sorts. The happy couple looked disgustingly happy and very much in love. But the smiling photos of Janet and the worm in the Post's public news pages really spoiled my morning. She looked as arrogant as he did. Janet was clearly a chameleon. She could absorb and imitate the personality of whoever stood next to her. Her betrayal was hard to accept, but she was also clearly a complete psychopath. I think psychiatrists call it dissociative disorder. I first saw this when she transformed into a completely different person during our visit to her father in New York. I just didn't get it then. Whoever was living in her head at that moment probably didn't know the others existed. That's why she was able to deceive me for so long. But she was clearly 2, perhaps 3, completely different and separate individuals. Janet's personality, which I suspect was her main one, was also unassuming and warm in the way that others were cold, calculating, cruel, and arrogant. The root cause of the various personalities living in her attic is undoubtedly related to some devastating event during her formative years. Her father was definitely causing the switch, so no doubt he was something important in her life. Regardless, Janet's situation definitely made me give up on women forever. What is a completely disillusioned and cynical nerd doing in a place like Paris, you ask? I'm not particularly sophisticated or worldly. The answer is familiarity. What happened to Janet had shattered all my inevitabilities, and I needed a reset, at least if I ever wanted to get back into the game of life. Until the moment my ex-wife dropped the bomb on my future plans, I was on a path that was probably set in the 3rd grade. I would study well, find a good job, marry a caring and faithful woman, and we would raise children and die in each other's arms. It didn't work out so well, did it? So I went back to the drawing board for a new start, and I didn't want to reinstate myself in any environment even remotely related to my old life. I deliberately chose not to live with the British; it would be too familiar, and I didn't want any transferable assumptions. I wanted to get away from life as far as possible, and Paris is a pretty foreign place for a guy who is more comfortable going to Comic-Con. But as Hemingway said, Paris is also a movable feast, and frankly, my move was doing its job. Every day, my old life faded further and further from my memory, and my self-confidence began to return. I would probably meet Bob Conn on Rue de Berry at Le Fouquet's on the Champs-Élysées. We could watch the world pass by behind our pastis and laughter. But it was raining heavily. The city can be a romantic dream at some times of the year, but on this April day, it was cold, grey, and gloomy. Robert Conn was one of a group of English-speaking expats who settled in the Parisian scene. It was his way of avoiding doing anything adult and responsible in the States. We were all here because we were looking for something, and we moved in the same circles because of our common language. He was another guy who inherited rather than earned his fortune, but he was a very tough guy despite everything. He was taller than me by a couple of inches, handsomer than the worm, and probably weighed about 220 pounds. He played college football at Harvard as a linebacker, and he was the epitome of an alpha male, smart, arrogant, and a little more smug than Lou Roman. For some reason, he almost followed me. Not a day went by that he didn't call or ask to meet. I was pretty sure it wasn't because of my good looks and charm. Perhaps he was attracted by the world weariness that I simply exuded, or perhaps he had some idea of who I really was. At that stage, I was filthy rich. I know I didn't act or dress like a multimillionaire. I was still sticking to the nerd style rather than the La Dolce Vita lifestyle, but all of us nerds are like that. Money means absolutely nothing to us. That's why we don't monitor it. My stay in California cost serious money, but it was a drop in the bucket compared to how quickly it added up. The most expensive thing I owned was a condominium that almost doubled in value on paper, but I paid cash for it, so my only real connection was through the current tenant, and it only made me richer. When he walked through the street door of the small bar at the entrance to California, Con was dressed in the style of Ralph Lauren's preppy collection. He moved like a big cat. Gracefulness is the word that comes to mind. In fact, he was a really tough and dangerous guy, but since he always had money, he could afford to be careless, as if he had been born to illustrate the word. He was wearing a very expensive leather jacket paired with a black t-shirt.